Dialed in. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm psyched to have Vernā Myers, VP of Inclusion at Netflix, and I think that's just your latest greatest thing. We'll get into a little bit how you got to that, to talk with us about some really, this has been a really important topic for so long, and now suddenly everyone's paying attention to it, and it's really moving fast, but it's not only moving forward. I mean, in the news this last few days, like another guy gets killed, gets shot, the Rochester thing this morning, I don't even know exactly what the heck happened on that. I mean, Vernā, it's been, I don't know, what has it been like?
A few months. Yeah.
I mean, yeah. Jacob Blake last week, it just felt like the exact same thing repeating again, you know, like 4 months ago, 3 months ago, 2 months ago, and it's been, I don't know, hundreds of years here in America. Now suddenly all eyes on it. You expect change, you start seeing some change. I guess I'm hopeful for change.
Yeah. Yeah. But, you know, I was thinking about when something is embedded, the way racism is in our country, it takes like and I hate to use sports analogies, but I'm an athlete by training. It's like a full court press. Like everybody's got to figure out like what they need to be doing in their arena and in their area, because this kind of injustice, this kind of bias, this kind of racism, this kind of power differential, this kind of inequity is sort of like it's in everything. And what has been the most exciting about what has happened through the revival of the Black Lives Matter movement, for some people it's brand new. For other people, like, where were you during Ferguson? Like, what were you doing? But we were like, Eric Garner was being, you know, chokehold on the street. Like, this is not new, but for some people it is. And I don't mind when you knew. I just want you to do something now that you know. You know, my mom, who just turned 90 years old on September the 1st,
Amazing.
she's famous for saying to us, when you know better, you must do better. It's just like her principle. It's one thing when you don't know, but if you didn't know, now you know, right? And so we have to find our way
on this problem. I mean, if there's a reason to be hopeful, it's like at this moment, everyone has seen it. There is absolutely no excuse. Everyone has seen it. Vernā, let's back up a little bit. We were talking a few minutes back before we got started here about the burden of responsibility, not just grief, as we look at what's happening out there. And I mean, you have dedicated your life to working on these problems, right? Like, this is a thing that you have invested so much time and energy, right? A Harvard-trained lawyer, an expert that I guess has been sought after by some of the biggest companies in the world on diversity, inclusion, on unconscious bias, and to the point that one of your clients recruited you in and made you their head of inclusion strategy at Netflix now. Can you give me a little bit about how that went down and what the mandate is for you at Netflix? I mean, I don't know that many companies with like a vice president of inclusion strategy. That's kind of amazing.
Yeah. I don't even know how it happened, man. You know, I've been at this for 20 years. I was practicing law for a little while, and then I started to recognize, hey, this is not the best use of me. And then I also was in Boston, and there were so few Black lawyers, and I started becoming much more aware of the systemic problems within the legal profession. And that's really how I started. I started just like, okay, I got to help my own folks, my lawyer folks, figure out what is the problem. Like, why is there such a paucity of Black attorneys? You know, you look at, it's not that we can't do this, right? You look at Marshall, you look at all these brilliant people who are incredible, you know, jurists. And so we know that's not the problem. So why, especially in the large law firms, are we not seeing representation? And so that's sort of how I started this work. So I was at it for 20 plus years, and I had sort of migrated outside of the legal profession into tech and entertainment and finance. And so Netflix was one of my clients, and I only went there really once. I talked to the fabulous people there. I made a presentation, and then it was on from there. They were like, well, can you come do this? Can you come do that? Can you talk to us about this? Can you talk to us about this? And the thing about Netflix is that the energy is so high there, and people are so very high performance oriented, right? So whatever they're doing, they're looking at how to improve, right? So they're thinking about, okay, what does this mean for the everything from, like, I was in meetings where, like, okay, what do we name this row? Right? You know, the names of your row. People are thinking about that through the lens of inclusion. They're like, how many people do we have in front of the camera? How many people we have behind the camera doing this? And then we're tech. So we're like, okay, the tech world has been, like, definitely underrepresented when it comes to women, when it comes to people of color, with the exception of maybe Asian, and then only a certain kind of Asian. So, like, what do we need to do so that we get all the talent in? Because we're about innovation. Everybody knows that diversity and innovation are connected. Positively, there's a correlation for ability to innovate if you don't have groupthink, if you're interrupting by different perspectives. So how do we get that? So they were just so interested that, you know, after a while of coming, they were like, I don't know if you noticed, but we're just gonna keep adding to your dance card. Maybe you should come and work with us. And my initial idea was like, no, I own my own thing. I do my own thing. I'm a Black woman. I'm rare. I want to keep doing what I do. I want to affect a lot of industries. And then they were very clear. They're like, you know, we are in charge of the narrative. And I'm like, that's true. You know, so much of what I used to talk about with regard to bias was just that bias is the stories we make up about people before we know who they are. And then I thought, oh my God, this company is letting us into all sorts of understandings and stories and narratives. This could be a way to help confront the stereotypes that prevent us from seeing people for who they truly are.
Amazing. There's a lot in there I want to explore with you, if you'll let me. So, sure. I mean, first of all, dream customer, it sounds like. So for you as like the battle-hardened consultant to all these like evil-doing companies, you get called in by these hippies in California and you're like, let me just show you how racist you are. And then it turns out they were like super, super intent on making change. I mean, is that the experience?
Yeah.
And this is way before this year.
Yeah. It was 2018, end of 2018. And quite frankly, Reid Hastings, who is the CEO, and now we have two CEOs, including the person who actually, Ted, who was actually heading up all of our content, is also now the CEO. But I just loved what Reid said. He's like, you know, we're going out into the world. We need to be ready. You know, we're trying to find stories from all over the world. We have to be able to understand, appreciate different, so on and so forth. We need to be ready. We're an American company. We're becoming a global company. You know, and so that is what was very powerful to me. Like, they could see that the future of their business was highly dependent on inclusion and diversity. And so not just diversity, not just representation, how many of these and those and whatever, which is important, and it is sort of signal, but sort of like, what is the experience of those individuals within our organization, and how
okay, well. But let me press this question a little bit with you, right? So dream customer, and of course you'd say that because now you work for the company, you're not gonna complain, or maybe you'll call it like you see it, because you show up and you meet these really like forward-thinking and innovative people, and they're singing from the songbook about inclusion, but like, what are the numbers? Like, what was the situation on the ground? How diverse was this place? How diverse was its thinking? You know, what was the job to do if these guys are all like, you know, so dreamy?
Right. Well, I mean, like I said, you know, like Netflix is both a tech and an entertainment company. So it was suffering from the same kind of underrepresentation that tech is, but had made lots of good efforts and had some evidence of those efforts, especially when it came to gender. And so you could see that the leaders there were like, okay, women are underrepresented in tech. Here are the things that we've been doing. And so those numbers look a lot better than most companies. Then in addition to that, we're looking at racial ethnic diversity. And if you break that down, like the Asian group was like, fairly well represented. I mean, that's part of the Silicon Valley world, right? But we were looking also at African Americans, we were looking at Latinos, we were looking at mixed race, so on and so forth. And so there was some work there, but still lots of work. We also still have to do lots of work. If I came on the entertainment side, we were looking better than a lot of organizations. And we continue to do that. But I'll tell you one thing that was powerful to me. I was made a VP, and at the time there were, so that's end of 2018, there were three Black VPs, maybe three, there were four. I think I made the fourth one. In 2 years, we are at 12 Black VPs, which to me, I've never even seen that before. Like, you go from, you doubled, more than double, triple, you triple in 2 years. And it's a lot about effort. It's a lot about understanding the importance of having really brilliant people from lots of different backgrounds informing how you move in the world.
How about the role of consultant? So just still sticking with this experience, because then we'll broaden it soon. But so you've got this woke company that's super innovative. It's already kind of a little bit better than others, and it's making progress, and it understands its responsibilities. So what does the outsider have to bring, right? I mean, folks who are listening here, and even for me, right? We're trying to change and move our companies forward. Sometimes you bring in a consultant in order to not do something, You hire McKinsey to get a PowerPoint and then have that thing go away. I used to work there, and I know that happened a lot. So is the role of consultant actually the critical change maker on a D&I kind of agenda? Or is it, like, especially if your people really want to do the work, like, talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so one of the things that I really liked about owning my own business, and by the way, Netflix said, oh, you don't have to give up your own business. So I continue to have my own business, which is really kind of, to me, an incredible nod. So if you're a company and you're thinking about how to support your women and your people of color and so forth, like, support the things they do that is outside of you as well, because that's part of equity and ownership as well. But, I liked it. I liked them because, and I chose the clients that I worked with. And and if I didn't like you, like, sometimes it would be so sad because someone would hire me and I'd love them. But then when I got into the organization, I'm like, oh my gosh, they don't have any backup, and they don't, and I would feel terrible, but I'd be like, oh, I'm going to try to help you the way I can, but I may need to leave you. And I had to sometimes. But when I came to Netflix and they're like, tell us what's wrong. And then I'm a consultant. So I'm like, and this is what you need to do, and this is what you need to do, and I don't see this, and they don't eat this, and blah, blah, blah. And they were like, give us more. Tell us more. Come back. And I was like, So they're not afraid. So part of our company's philosophy, culture, and by the way, Reid's book just came out, No Rules, Rules. But part of it is about disagreement and learning how to put forth different perspectives. So there's an appreciation for that. And I could see it even in this value around inclusion. So that is what made me think, and by the way, I have been asked many times before to go into a company, and I have said no in every case. Partly this was about the people I met, partly was about the fact that they were interested in dealing with honesty, and another part of it was that they were smaller. So I was like, okay, at the time there were only 4,000, now they're 8,000, now we're 8,000 in 2 years. But at the time I was like 4,000, I could actually know everybody in the company, right? So it was also about, like, how do you shift and move a culture and a group of people? How quickly can you do that? And how difficult that might be if they're already enormous.
Yeah. So it's cool because you've been on both sides, and I guess now that you're inside, surely you took the task because there is a sustained and deliberate process that takes a long time. The consultant can come back from time to time and give you kind of a diagnostic and a roadmap, but someone's got to get in there and just do a ton of really deep work to move it along. One of the topics that I think in our company anyway at Knotel, because we just, every one of us individually, and then I think our company as a collective was just paralyzed with grief and emotion these last few months from George Floyd onward. We're like out there marching, we're with the BLM, we're just like trying to figure out on personal levels how to go do things, but then also how to change our company. And the very first thing we put in the field with our folks was unconscious bias. Like we made people go do that implicit attitudes test, the Harvard project. We made people learn about subtle messages. We started engaging on that. And it's an area where you're a big expert, right? I mean, you've got this, I guess it's like a whole course on LinkedIn Learning that you created. You know, while you're giving us some prescriptions for how to make the world better from where we each sit in our organizations, talk to us a little bit about that. Like, what's the right, like, when do you know that you've succeeded on landing this message with folks on unconscious bias and getting them to do the work? I mean, you were giving an amazing example at Netflix where people are very intentionally thinking of seemingly unrelated and random things, like what should I name this row of a spreadsheet or something, but they're bringing that critical intensity of, wait a second, why are all the conference rooms named after men? Let's think about that, right? Maybe you can teach us a little here.
That's the, I mean, so that's the work. By the way, you said this idea deep, and that is why I ultimately jumped into this, which was with a consultant. And I see someone here asking about consultants versus people who are internally set up to do this work. As a consultant, you come in, you visit, you give people advice, you hope they follow it, you come back 5 years later and they say things like, well, we've been working with Vernā for 5 years. And you're like, please don't say that, because you have not followed anything I suggested. I have pride in my work as well, y'all. But what I realized is that, what would it feel like to go deep? What would it feel like to just sit somewhere and try to make it all the way inside of the practice, of the business practice, right? So that's the thing that I think that you are pointing to, which is, how do we, and my team, and what we're saying to every employee is, everyone needs to develop a lens, an inclusion lens. It's not, because inclusion can't be in every room. It can't be in every decision. And so the company will never be fully inclusive. The work we will do will never actually represent our ideals around equity and equality if we aren't thinking through the lens of inclusion. So unconscious bias helps to understand the neutrality that we have approached some of this work with. And I talk about neutrality as being a real enemy right now, because we used to be like, oh, it's neutral. Like what we do and how we do it is neutral. It's not true.
It's like saying you're colorblind.
Yes, because the neutrality is already got the racism baked into it. The norm, who's normal, what should they look like, well, how should they talk, what school should they come from, what dress should they wear, whether, you remember, you've got a beard. Remember when you couldn't wear beards?
Oh yeah, sure. Like my dad still.
He's like,
well, the color of my skin and a beard at an airport after 9/11. Yeah.
Exactly. And so unconscious bias helps us to recognize the way in which we are keeping the status quo in place unconsciously. And so what it says is, one, nothing you're doing is without some kind of bias. Two, you must investigate that bias to see whether it is creating structures of impediments for people who are not the norm. And then more importantly than anything, you got to get conscious and intentional. It's not enough to be just like, oh, you know, all of us are unconsciously biased. Bummer. It has to be, let me look at the ways I hire, who I promote, who my friend base is, what my networks look like. To what extent does that explain or allow me to see where my biases are?
Let me pull you a little further, Vernā. Let me pull you a little further on this one, because everyone who's interested in this topic, and I think everyone who's listening here, if they've spent 10 minutes trying to like think about this, the first layer of the smart answer is what I think you've given us now, right? Which is like, yo, check out how your company works, hiring, retention, whatever, go look at it. Part one is you're going to find out it's kind of biased. And then part two is less often spoken much about. How do you change it to make it better? And I want to pick an example, if you don't mind, that we can look like, sort of, we can kick around for a few minutes. And it's very personal for me, this example, but it's not on the beaten path. Usually we're talking about recruiting and retention and promotion. Here's one. It's called the meeting. So I've got a colleague, and the literature on this there's a lot. But I have a colleague who made this really vivid for me. We have a management meeting, or I, Amol, go to a meeting, and that meeting is racist. And I'm like, oh, geez, I guess you're right, actually. I mean, it's got to be, right, based on what you just laid out. But how do I dismantle and how do I reverse it? So I've been in a thought process, really just, it's a part of a lot of different things I'm thinking about. Let's pretend we're working together now. Our meetings are racist. What would you start by looking for? Like, where is the unconscious? What are the obvious first few things that are going to come up?
Right. So I'm going to say, just get curious and observing. Half the battle is observing. Who's talking the most? Who's speaking? Who created the agenda? Who found out what the agenda was going to be? When people make comments, how those comments treated. It's all about just paying attention. Are you rotating? Are you rotating leadership? Is there of the meetings? Is there a reason why you wouldn't? Is there a presumption about who's smarter? How quickly do you talk? What kind of terms do you use? I mean, we're now in a global company. I can't use metaphors and similes and all that kind of stuff that only pertains to my particular language or culture. How quickly am I speaking? Now
for
all
those
of us are
where
virtual.
English might not be their, yeah.
I mean, stuff is virtual now, and it's actually created more of a level playing field in some cases, but not if you don't get around the grid, because people sometimes, depending on your culture, you may need to be invited into the conversation. It's not that you're not confident. It's just that you haven't been asked. And maybe because of a position you have and the way things operate.
Turn taking and assertiveness, kind of that sort of norm.
Even assumptions, it's like, this person hasn't spoken, so this person has nothing to say. That's a bias, and it's more likely a bias because of sort of who you think that person is, where they came from. Here's another thing that people miss: mistakes. How we regard mistakes is often biased, right? This person made a mistake, it's an aberration. You may not know them better than the other person, but you have a bias for them. They went to this school. They talk this way. They are of this age. Therefore, that mistake is an aberration. This person made a mistake, and I'm afraid I knew that was not going to be good. Like I was worried.
There's an experiment that the Stanford psychologist Jennifer Eberhardt talks about in her book Biased, where she studies schools.
Yes.
African-American kid, boy, does something, gets in trouble, white kid gets in trouble. And she finds surprisingly that the first time it seems kind of not racist.
Yes.
And then the second time it's like, problem child, this one,
second mistake,
get out of here. And it's Jennifer very similar to this, right?
Yeah, she's amazing. She also has that experiment where she's telling teachers to look for the problem, and there is no problem, but somehow the teachers find the problem in the Black group. The behavior is problematic. There is no, so that's the other thing. Bias will add things that are not there, and it will not see things that are there.
It's about ambiguity, I think. A bunch of these experiments and some of the other literature on this, I feel, highlights when it's a judgment call, that's when bias can just run wild. Or when it's something that happens really fast that you don't think through and talk out and write down, where like the logic is explicit. And it's a very tricky puzzle because, these days in Silicon Valley, at your innovative, adaptive, companies, isn't that what people are really coaching for? So you've got a colleague somewhere who's like running, training sessions saying, be comfortable with ambiguity, make the decision fast. And then on the other side, you're like, wait a second, that's exactly how this system hides a lot of harm.
By far, the people who really study bias is like, slow it down. The only thing, have you seen that ladder of inference work? It's really powerful. If you haven't, just look it up, ladder of inference. But it talks about how we have sort of all of this data to choose from for our decisions, and how immediately, like the first rung, we just choose data. We're not looking at all the data. We select a bunch of data to look at. And from there, we just go up the rung, up the rung, up the rung, making meaning of it, confirming our understanding of the world, right? That's confirmation bias. We're looking for the things that confirm what we think we already know. That's what the brain is into. It is all about, like, how can I cut down this process of trying to process everything? I'm going to find the things that I think I already know, and I'm going to go with that. So slowing down, which is what many companies are not doing, including my own. We have to slow down. Compensation, promotion. There was actually a company that used this strategy. Whenever they were trying to make a decision about who was going to go in the C-suite, and they knew they had diversity efforts that they wanted to see. They wanted to see representation in the C-suite of people who had been underrepresented. So if it was a person's time to come up to be promoted, and you were not going to promote them, you were going to recommend that they not be promoted, you had to go back and you had to find all the disconfirming data for your decision. So go back and tell me all the reasons why this person should be promoted.
Yeah, that reminds me a little bit of a Netflix culture item, right? This whole debate thing,
yes,
reverse sides.
Yeah, you got to dig, because the neutrality, the status quo, the way of doing things, the discretion. So basically what we're saying is bias is always somewhere in discretionary decisions. And so you have to create like a strategy to offset that. Have people ask you questions. Ask yourself questions. What data have I used? What data haven't I used? What more do I need to look at? Why am I interpreting it this way? Is there another way to interpret it? I also say, look for the counterexample. Because you know how people are like, well, Joe, he's really awesome. Marianne, she's awesome sometimes. I mean, but she did have that other child. And so is she going to be awesome again? I don't think you're asking that of the guy. So why are you now projecting failure of the woman, right? So it's this thing where we have to keep a certain kind of humility about what we think we know, and we have to invite other people to give us their perspectives as well.
Let's stick with this meeting that I run that's so racist, and I think you just gave me like a ton of really powerful places to start. I want to try another version of it, because you were pointing out a couple of really like automatic things that I've just totally overlooked around cultural sensitivity, and what are the patterns that might just be valued implicitly without ever saying it out loud. But how about staying on this participation one, right? Like, so how about like the brilliant jerk? The brilliant jerk is not nice to the other team members, right? And every time I've seen the brilliant jerk, I've seen, or at least I've visualized it as like a nerdy white person. For some reason, I don't know why. Maybe myself. It's me or a nerdy white person. But over participation in a way that like turns calm stuff into stuff that's way too intense or too much of a debate, a form of disruption, basically breaking the norms of the group. Now, what if that norm breaking isn't a passive version where I hide in the background and I'm not acknowledged, but rather I'm way too assertive? Why is that woman so assertive? Why is that African-American male so assertive? Why are they being aggressive? Why are they being a bitch? Like, that's the pattern that you see. What do we do? How do we do we have to make it okay because versatile styles are okay? Or do we need to like somehow collect and share our tools? Or we got to just reprogram ourselves and stop calling people, the interpretation of assertion and
it would
aggression.
be great, right? It would be great if we had like, and some people actually do this, they film meetings. It's like a game. They watch it like it's like a football game, right? They film it and then they look at the film, right? So you can see where people are interjecting. You can see where people are where people are quieting other people or pushing people down, and you can see how the exact same behavior is interpreted differently. So this is the problem with bias, right? This is the problem that Black people have when they talk a lot about, hey, you know what? The reason why I didn't say anything in that meeting is because when I say things, I'm seen as aggressive. Women say the same thing. But when this person says something, it's just seen as he really knows his mind, right? So you start to question. So for example, like you can be in a meeting and someone can say, well, you know, especially like on evaluations or hiring, and someone's like, well, I feel like that person is pretty aggressive. You have to start asking people not to use code words. When you say that, what do you mean? And what is the impact of that behavior, right? So part of it is just evaluating the behavior you see and asking questions. And when you get good, you start doing that in the meeting. I hear you saying that, but I'm wondering what other people might think. Can we do like a round robin? Now, some people who aren't great at round robins because they are they're in, you know, maybe they're not extroverts, or maybe they like to think before they speak, right? You can have a culture that values extemporaneous speaking, even though if the person is not even saying the right thing. He spoke up, you know, right? So you have to actually figure out, you have to figure out what your values are. Do you just value introverts? Or do you just value extroverts? Like, because what you can say is something like, you know what I would love? We've been talking a lot. This works for some people, doesn't work for everybody. Can everybody just sit down and for a second, 5 minutes, just write something down? Then I'm just actually gonna go around, read only what you've written, don't extemporize or whatever. There are just different ways. If you get an agenda out early, people are more prepared. If you say to people, Josephine, I'm going to call you in the meeting to talk about this, please prepare. Because you know that this Josephine is brilliant, but you know she gets intimidated, or her personality is, or she's worried about whatever. And so you give her the heads up that you're going to be calling on her so that she can come and present, right? So when it comes to the brilliant jerk, do we have different standards for different people? Absolutely. We have some people who are quiet, but we attribute brilliance to that quiet. And we have other people who are quiet and we're thinking, I'm not sure they have anything to say. Why is that? So you just have to dig to say, why do I interpret what I interpret the way I do?
So much in there, so much incredibly good stuff. And like, you know, one particular thing I wanted to highlight is like the idea you can, once you get good at it, you can do it in real time. You can do it in that meeting. Like, hey, hang on a sec. I think someone was trying to finish, but more than just that, I think we just stepped on this woman 5 times in a row. Can we just like recognize that? That's not who we want to be, right? I mean, is that too dramatic to do in a...
No, you can say things like, do you know what I'm noticing? I'm noticing we keep interrupting people. Can we just make a rule that we're not going to interrupt? Right? I love this person who just wrote in the comment, and this person said, as angry Black man, woman, I sometimes start a conversation with, please do not confuse my passion for anger. This is what we have required people to do. We see what happens is you have underrepresented group of people who are trying to survive. They have developed such competencies in this area where they're like, okay, everybody, this is passion, this is not anger. You know, one woman said to me, when I cry, it's because I'm angry. I'm not sad. You know, but we've had to try to help other people interpret us. What we need, and the reason why we have not made enough progress, is because we do not have majority people doing the work they need to do. We've asked too much from marginalized folks. And as long as they're doing all the adapting, all the code switching, all the covering, it's never going to get better.
I could listen to you all day, Vernā. I guess now I know what happened when you went to go see Netflix. They just got addicted in the very first. But I want to, we have a limited amount of time together, so I want to move to a super big picture topic now. Like we were in that meeting room now for the last 10, 15 minutes and really like understanding what to see and how to hear. But it's no longer good enough to not be a racist, I don't think. And I didn't hear this term anti-racist until this year, until a few months ago. And I, you know, I read the Kendi and I like saw him talk and I'm like, oh my God, lay it out for us, please, a little bit. It's no longer good enough to just not be a racist, right?
Thank you so much, Kendi. Thank you all the people who are young folks, man, their vocab, I love it. I learned so much from my son who's 33, he's out here on the streets doing this work. First of all, anti-racism, we've been talking about anti-racism for years, but it never made it to the corporate arena. So I am so excited to be in corporate America during a time where we can say the word, we can say structural racism, we can say anti-racism, because Amol, I wanted to say these things, but truth be told, as a consultant, you don't want people scurrying the minute you open your mouth, right? You're constantly trying to be like, it's okay, come on in the water, it's okay, it's okay. And so certain words you just haven't used. The fact that we can say that to be good people, to be kind people, to be liberal people is not enough. To say I am not racist or that I believe in, equality is not enough. Because, as I mentioned, the status quo is racism. So basically what you have to be willing to do is to overcome and fight against the status quo. And the fact that a lot of majority people are starting, like, that awareness came over them, like, oh my God, this is what it is. If I'm going to be something different than it is, I have to be anti what it is. And it's breaking people's heart initially because they're like, but I was all into this and I really believed in this and meritocracy and all of that, right? And what we're saying is, it's not that meritocracy isn't kind of a lovely concept, it just isn't real until you can remove all of the barriers that prevent people from being able to show up in their best selves, right?
Well, it's not neutral, to go back to the term you used.
It's not neutral to decide that smart people only come from 20 schools, man. That's not neutral. Especially when you have a system that ensures that only certain people are going to get to those schools. You see, like, how in the world are you, or that you're going to give a test that is the gatekeeper to those schools, and the performance on that test is based on what you got from your earlier education, and that's based on what neighborhood you were in or who your grandparents were. You see, it's all stacked up to come to this small, little, narrow group of people who get opportunity. They get in, and then they cement that opportunity. And it's not because they're bad people. It's because it's set up that way.
I know, it kills me. I mean, some of my, ethnic confreres have been suing all the fancy schools because they don't let in enough Indian people, because they're like, there should be more.
Yeah.
And it's just like so wrongheaded. It frustrates me so much. I wish, because it's like you're slam dunking every day, right? If you're one of these Indian doctor people.
Yes. Yeah.
And you're like, why is anyone else on the court? Just give me both. It's insane to me. It is so frustrating.
But it goes back, Amol, to this idea, and this is part of white supremacy, which is a word we now get to say. White supremacy says that you deserve a space based on a certain set of criteria and be damned about the inequality around you. That's something we have all learned. It's not just your Indian brothers and sisters. They came, they played in this culture, and they're like, look, we're playing the way you say the game is played, and we're actually beating you at your game. We'd like to see us, right? But that's what, right? But racism is never going to do it. It's never, because white supremacy is the whole, racism is the function of keeping white supremacists, not supremacists, but white supremacy in place, right? So it's almost like, don't you all get it? Like,
yeah.
The whole
idea let me add another point in here. Let me add another point to get your reaction on this, because I thought this was one of the most brilliant insights of this literature around anti-racism. At least for me, it felt fresh. It was like, oh, wow, I hadn't thought about this before. Racism isn't about the intentionality. It's about the differential result on people. So if you come up with some kind of rule, like, what is the credit scoring algorithm of some bank or whatever, and it has different outcomes on white people, black people, Asian people, whatever, that thing is racist, especially when it disadvantages the folks that have already been disadvantaged in the past. You didn't even have to think race for a second. You just built yourself a neutral whatever. But the definition of racism in this way of thinking isn't about what your heart says. Forget your heart. It's about what are you doing with your mind and what are its consequences.
Yeah.
To me, this is a huge insight, because it actually, in a way, lets you say the word racism without calling someone evil.
Yeah.
Like maybe you can diffuse part of their unwillingness to talk because it's no longer about your heart.
Well, there are two things I would say about that. Absolutely, impact, impact, impact. It's the thing that people have not wanted to pay attention to. They've only wanted to talk about intent. Now we're having ask well, what's the impact of your behavior? What's the impact of that policy? I want us to have impact committees where you just like, what is the impact of that? And you know, the people who talk about unconscious bias, there was this great article, HBR article, which is like, are you an unethical manager, I think is what it was called. But they were like, when you're making decisions, if you should make a decision and change a policy if you didn't know what group you would be before you made the decision on that policy, right? So if you are actually, and this is the thing that I think about COVID and everything, and it's what I've been talking to my company, you make decisions for the people, for the least of us. You don't make decisions for the best situated group. Why? Because the best situated group was going to be fine anyway. And the least best situated group have already borne the impact over and over again. This is when we talk, Amol, about our companies and what they should do. And I mean, when you look at policies, people sit in rooms, they look at the data. It's not that they don't have the data. They look at the data, they see the differential impact, and they still make a choice to make it better for the people who are already in power. And they do it over and over and over again against the same people over and over again. I'd be all right, because some decisions are really hard to make. I'd be all right if they're like, okay, this time we're going to do it for this group, and this time we're going to do it for that group, and we're going to keep modulating and like alternating so the same group doesn't get disadvantaged over and over and over again. But our country is about disadvantaging the same group over and over again.
Long road.
We just got to see it. And like my mother said, once you know, you got to do better. You have to do better. And all of us have choices to make. All of us, like small choices, large choices. It's not like, okay, the CEO's got to do it. The diversity people have got to do it. Everybody's got to do it.
So inspiring. It's I mean, beyond inspiring, it is a call to arms. I think the stuff we've talked about just this last 45 minutes, there is so much work to do, but I mean, there's like a way to do it. It's not a mystery. I mean, there are moments when I sort of feel this overwhelming anguish of like what to do, but it's actually, here it is. You've been laying it out. I mean, you've got, there's a whole course you teach that's about this, that, I mean, we got to get to work.
You know what I love is that people like you who are asking themselves that question, because the minute you start asking your questions, you slow shit down. And when you slow it down, if you are an authentic person, which people want to believe they are, you can see what is wrong, and then you can have a chance to correct it and change it, and not do it out of some kind of sympathy for other people, but recognizing that all of us, all of our hearts and our minds and our souls are contorted and distorted by inequity. Because you have to sit there and you have to live through this. You have to watch people living on the street. You've got to watch women not make their best contribution. You got to watch Black people like be so devastated over and over again. Like, who wants to be in a society like that? And if you have a chance to change it, that's as good for you and your children as it is for any other group you're trying to help. You know, this isn't about sympathy or charity. This is about us getting our souls right.
Vernā Myers, thank you so much for investing your time with us and teaching us a little bit. We have a lot to do. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for everyone who tuned in.
I appreciate you so much.
We're going to save and share this conversation for folks who want to share it with others who weren't able to make it today. Wow. Wow. Stay tuned for that link.
All the best
everyone.
to all of you. Thank you for caring.